Hello, my name is David Adès. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry podcast reading series called Poets Corner in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see us sharing in a closeness of spirit, or much needed at the moment. Each month, I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Gayelene Carbis, who will be reading poems and talking with me on the theme of love, work, art. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Gayelene is recording from Melbourne in Victoria. I'd like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land from which Gayelene writes, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land which has never been ceded or given up. Gayelene Carbis is an Australian-Irish-Cornish-Chinese writer of poetry, prose, plays and short film. Her second book of poetry, from which you'll be reading today, I Have Decided to Remain Vertical, Puncher and Wattmann, was recently awarded finalist in the International Best Book Awards of 2024 US, and also awarded finalist Best Book Awards 2023 US, and finalist Poetry Book Awards 2023 Wales, United Kingdom, and I think has probably been awarded something else since I got this bio note. Her debut collection, Anecdotal Evidence, from which you'll also be reading, Five Islands Press, was awarded finalist International Book Awards 2019. Gayelene has won and been shortlisted for numerous literary prizes in poetry, fiction, creative non-fiction, plays and short film, including most recently second prize in the Liquid Amber Poetry Prize and finalist in the Paul Cave Prize for Literature 2023, United Kingdom. Her short film NONNO, with director and co-writer Zev Howley, is currently finalist for the Nepalese Film Festival and has won numerous awards in Australia and overseas. Gayelene's work has been widely published and performed in Australia and internationally, including India, Malaysia, Edinburgh, Oxford, New York and Canada, where she was awarded a Banff Residency Scholarship. She has also read her work widely in Australia and overseas and has been awarded first prize and finalist numerous times as a performance poet. Nominated for a Teaching Excellence Award, Gayelene has taught creative writing for over 30 years in universities and community programs. She's also taught Australian Indigenous Studies, foundation subjects at Australian College of Applied Psychology, EEL ELICOS, with international students, refugees and asylum seekers, and various creative writing and literacy programs with special needs groups, including homeless young women and people from supported accommodation. She ran the first literacy program for vision impaired people in Australia. Gayelene currently teaches creative writing in universities and community programs, including Sandy Beach, where she teaches a 5-hour creative writing class face-to-face and an online class, and works as a writing mentor and manuscript assessor. Gayelene lives and works on the unceded land of the Boonwurrung people. I'm not sure actually how Gayelene managed to write any poetry in between all that, but anyway, hi Gayelene and welcome to Poets Corner.
Thank you. Hello, David. It's really great to see you.
Yes, finally. So, Gayelene, just a small theme from you. Love, work, art doesn't cover much, does it?
Well, I always find it difficult to pin things down, so I thought I'd be very broad.
So they're all in their own right, enormous and complex themes. What prompted you to group them all together into one theme, apart from the fact that you didn't want to pin anything down?
Well, I suppose I was thinking about Freud and how Freud talked about work and love and work being so important, and so I was stealing from Freud really, and thought I'd throw love in there. No, what was the other one? Art. Yeah.
Do you have a specific meaning in mind with each of those elements in the theme?
Do I have a specific
meaning in mind? Is it just
Ah,
broad, or were you coming from a particular perspective? Does it have a particular personal context or orientation?
uh, no, just a broad, yeah,
Okay.
overview of what I think my work concerns itself with. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you how these subjects enter into your poetry, but is the question more, how can you possibly keep these things out of your poetry?
Well, yes, because it's so broad. But I think specifically when it comes to art, I do really enjoy reading and writing ekphrastic poems. So and it surprised me actually because I write so unconsciously, um, often or most of the time, when you're in a situation like this where someone asks you to come up with a theme or you're invited to come up with a theme, then you start looking at your work quite differently. And so I was a little taken aback at how many ekphrastic poems I had.
You surprise yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't realize. I mean, I do realize because I did structure it very specifically, but I sort of forget,
Yeah.
become, I'm not big on categories and, but I do love themed shows. I think yeah, podcasts and whatever, I think they're, they work really well. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, a sense that I got in reading your work, but I could be completely off the mark. Is your poetry mostly, or perhaps even completely, underpinned by an emotional core?
Well, yes, I think that's fairly accurate and true. Yeah. I mean, I'm a very emotional person. I cry easily at stories people tell me or films or books or so I'm a very emotional person and I think that comes through in my work.
Mm,
But I'm also very interested in intellectual ideas and engaging with different aspects of poetry and self. So I think um, I'd like to think that I bring everything to poetry, the body, the mind, the heart, the gut.
mm.
Yeah.
Do- um, have you always written poetry, or is it something that happened later?
Um, I I I wrote some poetry as a teenager, really bad poetry, really amateurish poetry. So it was much more something that came later. I saw myself for a long time before I was even taking my work into the world. I saw myself as a prose writer. I thought I was going to write novels and short stories, perhaps. So poetry definitely came later, and there were so many steps along the way to that were hugely influential. Even just meeting this Polish man in a cafe one day, who is a director and a writer himself, and we had this conversation. He saw me writing in one of my exercise books, so this was before I had ever sent work out, and he asked me, "Are you a writer?" And I said, "Well, I want to be. I write a lot. And he asked me if I wrote poetry, and I said, "Not really." And he said, "But you must," in a very emphatic Polish accent. And so that day I went home and I wrote this long so-called poem, and that was part of the whole journey, I guess.
Yeah, it fascinates me how people come to poetry, and
Uh-huh.
sometimes it's accidental, um, and sometimes it's like, in my case, I wanted to be a poet, but I didn't want to actually do the writing of poetry because what if I failed? So I just harbored the dream for a long time before I actually thought, well, you're not going to succeed by not doing. And I eventually got there, but it took, and then I it took me a while before I could actually say to myself, I'm a poet.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like I needed permission from
Yeah.
someone to do that. And I'm always amazed at these sort of people who are 18 are completely into it. How
Yeah.
they get there, it just
Yeah.
blows me away.
Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we read a poem?
Sure. So this comes from my first book, Anecdotal Evidence. It's called Scrambled. And I always introduce it in a particular way because the derivation of this poem, its origins, were so influenced by the background to it. So it's called Scrambled, and it comes out of, it's based on a dream that I had, which I told to my then partner, who is now retired, but a psychologist and poet himself, Lyndon Walker. So I told him the dream, and he said, he interpreted it as, he offered this interpretation. He said it was a very Freudian dream of the female fear of the phallus. So
Okay, I did not get that when I read it, but there we go.
so I love to introduce it in that way because it gets such a reaction from audiences. You know, it's like people react often with what, you know, and they're already up in arms about this man offering this particular interpretation. So it's interesting, but it influenced. The point is that it really influenced the way I wrote the actual poem when I came to write it. Saying that. So here it is, Scrambled. The huge yellow crane, disturbingly surreal, lifts sand and heaves. Grains scatter as dust. The sand grows heavy. All those grains pile higher and higher. The crane dips down, fills, and heaves again, shooting out like a sudden flame. The dream shifts, and we are in school, surrounded by books. My old primary, girls from college squashed into one small classroom, dwarfing desks. We are all writing novels. Adina spots the crane outside the window. It raises its head, Tyrannosaurus-like, peering through the second floor glass. Adina, lesbian, strong in her sex, says, "Run for your life, get out of here." We scramble like eggs, and our yolk splatters out. Adina leads like St. George. The school is submerging, swallowed up in sand, as the crane throws and throws again, sand through the wind. But I have to go back. My book is in there, my writing. I have left it behind. Adina says, "You're crazy, you can't." But I make my way back through shaking sand, along narrow passages. I believe I can go back in and get out safe with this poem.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the poem was influenced by Lyndon's interpretation of the dream. And that clearly changed the way it came out. How did you get from the dream to the poem?
Oh, that'd be challenging my memory. I wish I had a memory bank of how everything I've ever written came to be written. But anyway, I think it came from the unconscious, essentially, you know. So obviously with the dream, but also in the writing of it. But I think Lyndon saying that female fear of the phallus influenced how I began, I think, where I began with the huge yellow crane, and how I how I described the movement of that and its action, etc. I think all of that was influenced by that interpretation.
Do you keep a dream diary?
I used to.
Yeah, because I wonder sort of why this experience found its way into a poem rather than, say, a dream diary. Apart from the fact that you're a poet, so I guess it's going to find its way into a poem, isn't it?
Well, again, I think it's that interpretation that was offered that influenced me to actually sit down and write something out of it. Yeah, and maybe because it's just so visual and so it seemed to lend itself to the possibility of a poem. Though, I mean, it's also very narrative, so you could write it as a story, I guess.
Reading this took me straight to all the anxieties I have as a writer.
Oh,
you know, that you pour yourself into the writing and then there's a fire, and the work is lost, or the computer crashes and the work is lost, or you do the work and you can't find anyone to publish it, or it's published but no one reads it. The anxieties are endless, which all writers have. We share that.
absolutely. I'm curious then, do you share that interpretation that Lyndon offered?
No.
Okay.
No. But I was wondering if the anxieties fuel poetry or get in the way of poetry for you.
I think they got in the way for a long time. I mean, I think I found it very difficult to call myself a poet for a very, very long time. And even now I tend to prefer saying I'm a writer because I write across so many genres. And poetry, it's not that I wouldn't call myself a poet. I tend to say more I write poetry. But in terms of the anxieties, it doesn't get in the way in terms of how often I write or anything like that, because I'm very prolific. I write a lot. It doesn't mean, it's all wonderful stuff or anything, but I am prolific.
There's a pivot in this poem that struck me right in the middle of the poem. And in just a few lines, you paint a portrait of Adina. She's in her sex, and this comes across as being decisive, certain, a woman of action, leading like St. George, going off to fight the dragon. And though it's not said in the poem, the inference to me is this is someone the narrator admires. These are qualities the narrator would like to have. Is that a fair inference to draw?
Well, yes. If you're talking about the speaker of the poem, yes.
Yes, I'm talking about the speaker of the poem. I'm not confusing the speaker of the poem with.
Oh, you did say the narrator.
I did. I'm very careful about that. I've fallen into that trap before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that admiration of those qualities is very very real. Yeah. Though I think it's interesting because even though Adina's the one who says you can't do that.
So that was going to be my next point. Then the narrator does something even Adina wouldn't. She goes back to retrieve her book, and it's crazy, but it's kind of full of a fierce courage too. The book is everything, and there's nothing more important than coming out with something. Is that what writing means to you?
Well, that's very pertinent at the moment. Yes, it is what writing means to me. I lost one of my writing books a little while back. I write in these 128-page exercise books, and I do a lot of my creative work in those books, but they have lots of stuff in them. And I lost one, and it was like losing a limb. I didn't write for, I don't know how long it was, a month or 2 months after that. I was really, really affected by losing that book. And fortunately, though, I found it again. So I feel
It's
whole.
a happy ending.
Yeah, I feel whole again. But I found other things now to be, anxious or whatever about.
Oh no, no. I mean, you hear about the computer crashes, and you just don't
I know.
want to go there.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. Would you like to read another poem?
sure. So I'll read the first poem from I Have Decided to Remain Vertical. Marrying Freud, Ladder to the Moon, after a painting by Georgia O'Keeffe and in memory of Anya Volvitz. I dreamt I married Freud. He was turning down the bed when I turned to see him. One hand held mid-air, as if he were conducting something, an alertness on his face at a faint strain of music or a sound outside. I thought of strutting past him in my new sleekness, all those kilos I'd lost without him while he was away and I was alone. I'm so small after all, and those 70 kilos had surrounded me like I was keeping the world away. Then he went away and now they've gone. So here I am standing at the door watching him as he prepares in that painstaking way he has, slow but steady. And I thought, I'm really not sure about this. I'd leapt into love and sex, not in that order, he'd say. When I was young and green, I didn't know what I wanted. A man, a house, a baby, a life. I knew I needed to write. Nothing else could have me. I would never see a man now. I don't know how other women do it, justifying male therapists with father issues and transference. Power is always between you, like the sheets, like sex, as he'd say. When Freud patted the sheet as if it was his dog, I was galvanized into action. I went back to the kitchen, sat at the table and wrote about my day. It took me all night. He hates sleeping alone. I stayed in the kitchen, and when he came out, bleary-eyed in the morning, I let him make his own coffee. I'm not his fucking mother. When I woke from the dream, I decided there are going to be a few changes around here.
Oh, I love this poem. Um,
Thank you.
and I love what Marion May Campbell, in her review in Mascara Literary Review, says of this poem. And I'm just going to quote it because I think it's just so spot on. I'm sure you've read this. And we've got a plane flying overhead. Let's wait for that. The dream scenario of marrying Freud conveys a sense of wild exuberance, not just through its refusal to espouse the great man myth, but also through the matter-of-factness which domesticates Freud, turning him into a kind of housemaid. Again, Dora's revenge, Dora being the pseudonym for the gifted young woman of Freud's case histories who dared dismiss him, he said, like a maid of all work. Freud here expects to be both sexually and domestically serviced. This savage brand of feminism is all the more hilarious through its continence in constraining form. Freud awaits in the marriage bed whose sheet he has folded back. He's already unconsciously become the chambermaid. In anticipation, while his dream wife in the kitchen through the night writes her glorious resistance, the poem we are reading, refusing to bring the anticipated coffee, I'm not his fucking mother. Doesn't she nail that? I mean, to extrapolate all that from the poem is fantastic. There's an awful lot going on in this poem, isn't there?
I think so, yeah.
So how did you come to write it? Was this was another dream? 2 dreams and 2 books so far?
I have written quite a few poems that come from dreams, but actually this dream, or rather dreaming of Freud, was something that Anya Volvitz said to me when we were at a cafe one day, that she often dreamt of Freud, but it was the first time she actually said to me in one of our many meetings, I dreamt about Freud last night, So and
It's a
so
very Anya sort of thing to say, I think.
yes, and so there are bits of Anya that and Anya's biography and little bits of Anya that are in the poem, which of course she read and gave me permission to publish.
Mm.
But I must say also that, well, not that I must, but it's interesting because people so often read work as autobiographical, and this is in certain ways, but I don't agree with the perspective of the persona in terms of her saying, I would never see a male therapist, or I would never see a man now, and the whole attitude about women seeing male therapists. I don't agree with that at all. I saw a male therapist for many years.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the idea of playing with the narrative I in poetry, and mixing it up a bit, writing from other perspectives, and you know, asking your audience to actually think through that this is not necessarily the poet's own voice speaking, but a voice that the poet has either imagined or created for whatever purpose.
Yes.
So I think that's important. I think it's an important aspect of poetry. Otherwise, it's too limiting. This opens up to write poems you never would write otherwise.
It's a different voice. It's a different persona. It's something that belongs to that particular poem.
And not, I don't know why I keep wanting to go back to the same question, but I am so intrigued about how you came to write this poem too. Was it through that conversation with Anya, or other things sort of prompted the poem?
I think it was mostly that conversation with Anya, really. Yeah. But also what also comes into it very much is Lyndon Walker, and whom I lived with and was in relationship with, and is still my closest friend. And he greatly admires Freud, and at the time I met Lyndon, he introduced me to Freud in terms of reading Freud's work. So I was reading Freud's work at that time. So that came into it too.
You've already said, dreams are the subconscious, whereas the writing of poetry is very conscious, although it can be intuitive rather than, total craft, if you like. But what do you think is the thread that draws your poems to your dreams, or your dreams to your poems?
I'll just go back to something you said actually about poetry, or the writing of poetry, being very conscious. I don't experience it in that way at all. I sit down and just write and things come out, and it's only afterwards that I become more conscious in terms of the editing process. And I'm very rigorous, and well, I edit a lot, multiple drafts. So, but in terms of getting to the poem, it's often very, very unconscious.
And the thread that draws your poems to your dreams, or your dreams to your poems, who knows?
What do you mean by that? Do you mean a common theme, or?
No, you have the dreams. I have dreams. They don't ever hardly ever manifest into poems. So
Well,
I know that, for example, Peter Boyle writes a lot of dream inspired poetry, and it's very, very significant for him. So I'm just curious about the relationship, I guess, between the dream and the poem.
Right. Okay. Well, I think because I'm so interested in psychology and psychoanalysis and dream work, then everything's up for grabs when you write. So, and because I did keep I'm not doing it now, but I kept a dream diary or dream diaries for, I don't know, 30 years or more.
Wow. Mm.
Probably more. So it's there, you know, it's part of something that's important to me and how I see the world. So it's not surprising that it would turn up in my work.
Mm. You mentioned that this is the opening poem to your collection, I've Decided to Remain Vertical. It's also the opening poem to this fabulous anthology out of the States, the Power of the Feminine Eye. Why was it important for you to open your collection with this poem?
Well, actually, I really struggled with coming up with a structure. I always do. Structure I find really difficult. So it took me quite a while to work out how to structure the collection. And eventually I had this breakthrough, and through a conversation with a friend who also writes poetry. And so it was partly that I came up with the idea of having ekphrastic poems to begin and end each section. That I would, well, firstly, that I would structure it into 3 sections, which was just felt sort of coincidental. My first book was like that too. And so that was the overview, and then within that, having that poem begin the collection. I think it was important to me to begin with something like this because I felt that this poem captures my voice, and that some of my central concerns, a feminist consciousness, my engagement with Freud and psychoanalysis and those things, and the I that we've already talked about, that being important too. I was a little nervous when we were talking about anxieties as a poet before. I was quite nervous about saying I'm not his fucking mother. I thought, oh, this will put some people off. You know, I could just imagine the general reader in the bookstore having a look at the first poem and getting to that. And, you know, people react so differently to language, to expletives and explicit language in text, to how they respond to that kind of language in film or TV or whatever.
That kind of language always works best, I think, when it's not expected. And here, for me, reading that poem, I didn't. I mean, I just laughed. I thought it was hilarious.
That's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think these days,
Yeah.
I mean, I've got kids who are teenagers, and that language comes out all the time. These days, I think probably we're more accustomed to that kind of language, both in text as well as in spoken word. But no, I mean, I think it makes a statement, doesn't it? It makes a statement, and it launches the book with that statement.
Thank you
So,
for
yeah, and I mean, obviously, the people who put this together, which has hundreds of poems in it, and starts off the whole collection with that poem, thinks it makes a statement worthy of, you know, starting that book with it as well. I want to change the subject a little bit. One of your themes is art, and it's central, as you said, to your ekphrastic poetry, and many of your poems respond to artworks. Tell me about Georgia O'Keeffe's Ladder to the Moon, which I looked up once I looked up that painting once I read the poem, and how that painting influences this poem.
Well, I really love the work of Georgia O'Keeffe, and especially her you know, the images that are really well known, the flowers and so forth. So when I came across Ladder to the Moon, it was so different to the work that I'd seen of hers. You know, I mostly knew all the beautiful flowers. So, and it had that feeling of a dream because it's surreal. It's this ladder suspended in this lovely blue, turquoise blue sort of sky, and this yellow ladder. So, and there are these mountains below, and so it had that dreamlike quality, and so that connected with Anya and Anya's dream.
It's been described, the painting Ladder to the Moon has been described as being comprised of images all of transition. I get the sense from the last line of the poem there are going to be a few changes around here, that you see this as a poem of transition too. Do you want to say something about it?
Yes, I see it as a poem of action, that the persona of the poem is going to definitely make those changes. And those changes pertain to the self and to the relationship life. And yeah, that's interesting, the writings that you came across about transition. I saw it as very much also about connecting nature and the wider universe, the cosmos sort of thing, and somehow that plays into it too.
Here's a question. Have you had any feedback on this poem from psychiatrists? Or psychologists?
No, I
Damn, I wanted to know what they said.
I must ask Lyndon about his interpretation, but actually, no, I haven't. Yeah, I just feel sad when you ask me that, because the analyst that I saw for half my life, on and off, but more on than off, he recently died, very young, but lived a very rich, full life, full of love and purpose. And
so you never showed him this poem?
He had read my book, but which he described as excellent, but he didn't comment specifically on that poem. And also he's a Lacanian psychoanalyst. There wasn't a lot of talk.
Right, okay. Well, listening. Yeah. All right. We could go on, but let's try another poem.
Okay, so this next poem is called Red Horse by the River, after Red Horse by the River, a lithograph by Anselm van Rode. When you were a child, you drew a red horse by a river. Your teacher told you horses weren't red, but black or brown or grey or white. Your father thought your red was too bold, too bright, a bit over the top for a horse. His eyes turned cold. I think he feared for your future. He called you a sissy under his breath. He blamed me for the red. Your father never denied their existence, though none of us had ever seen them. We'd heard of them out there on the range. Someone said they'd seen one once down there by the river, but no one believed him. I did, though. He went into so much detail, and his eyes went all dreamy. I almost believed I'd seen it too. Your father said your version of red was ridiculous. You should show only what's real and true. I know, you said. I know.
Oh, we could have a big conversation about this poem. Yeah. I know that children have this creativity around art that gets beaten out of them by, expectations that a door should look like a door, and that artists often have to unlearn what's been imposed on them so that they can get back to that creativity. So we'll have a chat about that in a minute. But I wanted to start by referring to the lithograph that you've referred to by Anselm van Roodt. Can you say something about the conversation again between the artwork and the poem?
I love Anselm van Rood's work, and especially his use of colour. So the colours in this lithograph are really beautiful. The blue sky and this red horse. So that piece of art inspired me in terms of sort of fantasy. So I went into that poem is like an imaginative story, because that speaker is some imaginary character. I imagined this different time and place, and this woman with this child. So the painting or the lithograph rather, sent me off into this imagined world.
I mean, I love that about ekphrastic work, because it takes you places where you would not otherwise go. And I love that the variety of responses you can get. So if you look at the Rattle Poetry Monthly ekphrastic poem and see the kinds of responses they get, and how they vary, and how people bring such different perspectives to the same piece of art, and it's endlessly fascinating. But getting back to this question about the need to conform to a certain way of seeing the world, this poem very eloquently, I think, captures the pressure on children to conform and the damming up of their creativity and imagination by the demand that things be real and true. You say that this is imagined, but does this poem reflect any event that you experienced?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that, well, even in my, I write memoir and creative nonfiction, etc. And I will have some family members make comments about that's not accurate, that's not true, that's not da 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 da. And okay, if that's memoir, then fair enough. But if it's creative nonfiction, or if it's story, then being fully accurate and fully truthful isn't the point of the story.
Well, I think even memoir, because it's how you remember. It's not how someone else remembers, and people remember the same things differently. I mean,
Sure. Nevertheless.
I remember having a girlfriend once, and we traveled together, and I would tell a story about the travel, and she'd say, "No, that's not how it happened." But there was it had to be 100% factual, whereas I was not unfactual, but there was the sort of poetic overtone, if you like, of the experience, which was real enough to me. So I don't know that any of that's illegitimate, but
yeah. Mm.
Horses for courses.
Yeah.
Horses for courses. There we go.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the depiction of the father here,
Uh-huh.
the possible fearing for the child's future and calling the child sissy under his breath, blaming the narrator for the red. What do you think's going on with the father?
I think the father is like certain males and some females too, who have a very patriarchal view of the world, very rigid, and who deny the feminine and want to squash that or destroy it or subjugate it, or
Mm.
you know, who have just what I'd call a very masculinist view.
It's funny because I consider myself masculine, but I don't. I could never do. I could never do something like that. I would be celebrating I would be celebrating the creativity. So
Uh-huh.
I don't relate to that kind of person at all. I know that person exists, but I don't relate to that kind of and I kind of would have hoped that they're disappearing, that kind of repressive.
Oh,
No, oh well.
I don't know about that. In fact, I think quite the opposite. Mm.
That's interesting. Oh
I mean,
well.
hopefully things are changing, but I think those codes of masculinity and ideas about gender, I think they're very, very entrenched.
And it looks like, I mean, I think you've pinpointed here that it comes from fear.
Mm,
It comes from a kind of fear. The
yeah,
that this challenges them in some way.
absolutely.
Mm.
And I'd even connect this with, it makes me think of Jess Hill's book, See What You Made Me Do.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
read that.
isn't it amazing?
It's an amazing book. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's I think that's three. There's several poems that are responding to art, but all three poems so far are kind of like dreamlike or
Yes.
in a dreamy kind of way.
Mm, mm,
Sometimes the membrane between reality and dream seems very thin.
mm.
Um, in this one, the narrator's friend's eyes went all dreamy. Do you regard poetry as a transit point or bridge between reality and dream?
That's an interesting way to put it. I think it can be. Yeah, I think it can be, but I think that some poetry is more like that than others.
Mm,
Yeah, and I think that that manifests in language and how the poem comes across. I love something that Marie Howe said. The poet Marie Howe. She said, in poetry, you can hold what can't be said. It can't be paraphrased. It can't be translated. And that she loves poetry that holds the mystery of being alive, and that it's like it's kind of in a basket of words that feels inevitable. And she also said, relevant to this, what you're talking about dream and reality, that poetry has a kind of trance-like quality, like a
mm,
spell. It's incantatory.
mm.
Mm.
Can't argue with that. I mean, good poetry. The sort of poetry I aspire to. uh, don't always get there. Um, I found the last line of this poem devastating, and no doubt intentionally so, in its capitulation to the expectation that creativity should be fettered in this way. I know, you said, I know. Um, it's just
Ah,
so it's just so utterly deflating to me in this context. I can just imagine this child, head down, eyes facing the ground, tears welling up behind them, feeling totally invalidated and defeated. Is that something you were trying to convey, or have I misread it?
wow, that is so interesting. I had no idea, never even thought that someone could respond to it in that way. But I can absolutely see what you're saying, and maybe there's not enough that I've given there that conveys actually how I was seeing it or feeling it. Because when the child says, I know, it was actually meant to be a child's wisdom, a child's irony, that when the father says you should show only what's real and true, the child is actually saying,
I did.
I know. And the child has done exactly that.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe I need to rewrite the poem.
No, I think we should do a poem, 13 ways to read a poem. I think that
Yeah. But I think your reading, I can see how you could get that. I think that's an empathic reading, of how a child might feel.
Because so often the child is invalidated and defeated, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Do you want to read another one?
Sure. This is called You Are Not Your Poetry. I'm in love with you because you write poetry. I'm in love with your poetry because I'm in love with you. I'm not in love with you because you write poems for other people. I'm not writing poems for other people because I'm in love with you. I could never love you because you use lines you've used on me, on others. I can never love you because you use words you wrote for me for someone else, and there's always someone else. I will always love you because you are a poet. I will always write poetry because I love you. I don't write poems about love. I'm not in love with anyone. I don't love you. I love your poetry. I don't know the difference.
Gayelene, you have the right to remain silent and refuse to answer questions.
Well, I do have permission from the, this does not come out of a dream, or not.
I had to read this a few times and I'm still not sure what is going on here. But I guess this clearly goes to the love aspect of your theme. But it reminds me of those Harry Potter bags of jelly beans where you can get, lovely flavored jelly beans and then vomit flavored jelly beans in it's a mixed bag. So I guess what I get from this is that you think the relationship between love and poetry is complex.
Yes, especially when you're with another poet. Especially when you're in relationship with another poet, perhaps. Yeah.
It seems a bit unresolved.
Yes.
It's a work in progress.
Ambivalence.
Yes.
It's called the Queen of Ambivalence.
I mean, there's so many ways to read this. In my experience, such as it is, anyone who has loved me has done so despite my writing poetry, not because of it. Is this poem trying to take away the gloss of idealized love and presenting love as a confusion?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just it's expressing my experience of this particular love, the specificity of loving this person who is also a poet. Yeah.
I could imagine if I was writing this poem, many other lines for the poem. For example, love is a poem.
Oh, that's yeah.
How many lines did you discard before you settled on the final version of the poem? I mean, you could have gone on and on and on. How do you know when to stop when you're writing something like this?
Actually, yeah, quite a few, I think. I think I kept going, and then I just kept what I thought were the most interesting and that connected and flowed, and yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
Why did you want to read this one today?
I think because I like to balance reading. I like dark and light when I read, like the light and humorful and some darker poems as well. I like to have that balance whenever I read. And so and I like work which sort of straddles the two as well. So for me, this is funny, and it's also, there's a seriousness there as well.
Yes, and it's layered. I mean, you actually have to stop and think about all of these lines and how they're not necessarily in conflict with one another, but they're not also altogether at ease with one another, these lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is pretty much what a relationship is, isn't it? It's all those confusions and ambivalences and changes of mind and flux.
Yes. Yeah. Mm.
Have you had feedback on this one?
General feedback, like people might say, oh, I really love that poem. It's so funny, or, just general stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this?
Well, it surprised me that when you ask about feedback, Kevin Brophy judged the Ada Cambridge Poetry Award and awarded this poem highly commended. And I was really, really surprised by that, because I thought it was very prose-like and so accessible, and so it really surprised me. I mean, obviously I entered it into the competition, but sometimes you enter things for whatever reason, and then you can be really shocked when a particular thing is selected or resonates with a reader.
I mean, I think a lot of Kevin's poetry is accessible.
Oh, yes, I love it.
That's and there's something about this poem that's quite taut. It's not overblown. It knows when to stop. So yeah, I could see that. But perhaps what you're thinking is, despite its sort of serious side, it might be considered light for a prize.
Yes, exactly.
But the beauty of those things is the subjectivity that, judges bring to it.
Yeah.
And so I always enter those things thinking, well, anything's possible. Usually with me, it's not. But you never know, and that's the fun of it, isn't it? I mean, yeah. All right. Do you want to read another one?
This is called Haunted. You see how unconscious I am? I didn't even realize I'd chosen so many poems which either have their origins in dreams or
They're dreamy.
dreams, yeah. And this one fits into that category. Haunted. I'd filled the house with furniture, then thought I'd better tell the landlord I'd moved in. The house was huge. There were empty spaces out the back, a rambling yard. I was in Buckley Street. When the Egyptian left, he'd said, Buckley Street, what hope did we have? Still, I dream of my beautiful house that was never mine. I stand behind the Tyrolean curtain and look out the window. I watch the neighbours. Next door, there are hippies, former housemates of mine. They wanted to keep bees and chickens in the courtyard near the compost. A few doors down, a woman I knew in primary school who's returned to the area. I've never left. Her face has grown hard. People show up in your dreams to show you something, but how can you ever work out what? My Lacanian analysis is cryptic. You will live and die in Carnegie, the last thing the Egyptian said as he left, standing at the door, then turning towards me from the front gate. He made it sound like some sort of crime, though he was prone to statements like that, matter of fact, almost factual, as if foreseeing the future is possible. He believed in destiny, your life mapped out, and ultimately chosen by God. He knew I thought it was the life I'd chosen. But had he, circumstances, family, and society bearing down on us? I threw the yellow roses he'd bought me that Christmas Eve, my birthday, in the bin. I asked him if he knew why, and he did. In the dream, I tear the Terraline curtain, call out to the neighbours, hide behind the torn curtain. I know they will all find out soon that I've moved back in without asking anyone if I could.
For our international viewers, did you want to explain the very Australian meaning of the line Buckley Street? What hope did we have?
Oh, yes. I didn't even think of that. So there's an Australian saying, you've got Buckleys, which means you've got no chance in hell.
Which I think refers to an explorer who disappeared or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you about this. The poem refers to the Egyptian, who appears in a number of your poems.
Yes.
A bit of across both books.
Mm-hmm.
Has he become kind of a poetic muse?
I guess so. Yeah. Well, I write a lot about my life experiences and things I struggle with, etc. And he's been one of them.
I have a disclosure to make.
Mm.
My family's from Egypt.
Oh.
There you go. I was very curious about the Egyptian
Uh-huh.
because in the totality of his appearances, he's very enigmatic, and there's I love the references to him as the Egyptian, and there's a lot that's said. He was prone to statements like that, matter of fact. Which statement you make matter of factly in the poem, but there's a lot left unsaid. So he's kind of for a reader like me, he's kind of like a curiosity I want to know more about. But I guess I just have to keep reading your poetry, won't I? So you mentioned also that this is again a dream kind of sequence, and the poem's titled Haunted. It seems to me that there are so many things that haunt the narrator of this poem. Did you want to go through all the hauntings in this poem?
Oh,
You want
well.
me to list them? I've got a whole bunch of I've got a whole list of hauntings here.
Well, I guess there's the haunting of the relationship, but really, when I look at it now, when I read it today, I think there are a lot of hauntings, you're right. Yeah, there's the haunting of relationship, there's the haunting of family, there's the haunting of circumstance, all of those things, haunting of memory and the past. But I think the strongest, and which occurs throughout my work, is about the whole notion of home and housing. Because I rent in share accommodation, and I've done that for a number of years since I separated from that partner actually in this poem. And also, yeah, anyway, it's complicated. I won't go into the whole thing.
A sort of sense of precariousness.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I have very precarious housing, very insecure, unstable housing on an ongoing basis
Mm. Mm.
as a renter, you know.
And the dream itself is a kind of haunting, isn't it?
Yeah, the dream itself too. Yeah.
I'm interested in the woman from primary school days. Um, she doesn't, the nature of the relationship from primary school days is not disclosed, but there's not an affinity there, is there? She's there as though, are these all kind of like anchors to the place? The hippies next door, the hippie former housemates, and the woman from school days, and are you trying to anchor yourself to the place in a way?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. And there isn't an affinity, no. Her face has grown hard.
Mm.
So, you know, there's the implicit that once she was not that, you know,
Yeah.
primary school, and the changes that life and time and so forth have brought.
Mm. We get to the end of the poem,
Mm.
and it seems to me that both destiny and choice remain possible. Like it's not closed at all. The poem doesn't take a side in that argument. Is that a question that vexes you, or are you comfortable leaving it open-ended?
I think I do sit more on the side of, yes, it's open. Those things are always open. But
Not for everybody.
exactly, yeah. And so, and on a personal level, as being in the rental market, and as you know, I tick all the boxes. I'm an older woman, I'm single, I'm separated, I have a disability, etc.
Mm.
So I have precarious work and precarious housing. So the whole notion of choice and yeah, is vexed.
Yeah.
Mm.
One of the things that struck me about this poem was that a whole bunch of people come and go in the poem, but the narrator is in the house alone. And there's a sort of pervasive loneliness, really. She's told that she will live and die in Carnegie, but at the same time, there's no sense of belonging coming through at all in the house that was never mine, you know. It feels as though, talking about precarious, everything is provisional, which captures the ephemeral and provisional nature of dreams. But is that sense of everything being provisional and in a kind of uncertain flux something that follows you out of the poem into your own life, as you've said, you know, with the precarious housing and the precarious job? And
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's
you
something.
can't write your way out of that, can you?
No.
Pity.
I've had to really work on improving my response to housing stress.
Mm.
You know, every time I have to look for a new house, I set up what I've done since I separated. I don't want to live in a tiny shithole in whoop whoop sort of thing, you know. So what I do is I set up a property each time, and carry rent and bond on my own for 2 months or so while I look for someone. And yeah, and then I have housemates, but because, you know, I live in a unit, a smaller sort of property than I lived with when I was living with my respective partners. Then it tends to be people from other cultures than who are attracted to the place, you know. So they come and go, you know, sort of thing. Stay a year, 2 years, whatever. And so then I'm looking for a new one, and you know, it's always hanging over your head that a landlord can want to sell or renovate or whatever. And I've had to move a number of times because of those things. So yeah, all those things you see on the news about the realities of renting and housing stress and all of those things, you know, something that is very, very pervasive and real in my life. And I feel like I've only, you know, barely touched on it in my work, really.
Well, I hope it somehow gets better. We need interest rates to come down, which won't happen anytime soon. But and we need more housing built, which won't happen anytime soon either. So
yeah,
it's a very difficult way to see a path forward for a lot of people. Did you want to read another poem?
Sure. So to change the mood completely, this poem comes from my first book, and I chose it because it's one of the poems I first started reading in public. I liked reading what I thought of as more performative poems that would get me into the spirit of reading, and this is one of them. And it comes from Anecdotal Evidence. Audrey Hepburn and I consider our assets. And I must say, the title that Lyndon actually suggested to me. And again, it comes out of a dream. It's sounding like all the poems I've ever written came out of dreams, but that's not the case at all. Audrey Hepburn and I consider our assets. I crook my elbows at my table, angling out like a chicken, with the bones bared and bent, and all for breasts. Bigger than my bottom, they divide me from my desk. I keep them cupped up in seamless bras to pretend I'm flowing. When I'm spilling out, these cups hold lavish lumps of flesh that can't be contained by burley. I would have liked to have burnt my bra and carried signs in streets about the compression of my body in man-made clothes, but the truth is, my breasts are too heavy and have to be held up, or else I'd be as floppy as a rabbit, dragged around the house by a 2-year-old, my nipples falling off like buttons for eyes in those bunnies. As a teenage girl, I tried to tape them down the way they did with Judy, her strange flat bosom almost bursting through her pinafore as she skipped off along the yellow brick road. I had no tape, only cunning. I was careful and went around asking my brother, "Do you think I look busty?" I spent my adolescence in disguise. I didn't want to be opulent like a Chinese opera or overdone like Pavlova. But aunts would come and undo my top button and cry, "When you've got 'em, flaunt them," and admire my figure, telling me I looked like Sophia Loren when I wanted to be Audrey Hepburn, singing "June is busting out all over" in my own voice.
Well, I wanted you to read this one because I love the title. Thank you, Lyndon. So I take it that the poem came first and the title came later.
Yes.
It's brilliant. It's a very, well, is it? Personal poem from the point of view of the narrator, I suppose.
Yes.
Do you have any concerns or fears about letting it out into the world? And if so, how did you overcome them?
No, I didn't. I think because there was such a distance between when I was reading it, and I read it in public before I had it published. And there was such a distance between that adolescent self and, you know, and reading it at an older age. Although, I guess, actually, you're bringing it back to me now. I'd forgotten. Yeah, I think I did feel a little bit self-conscious, especially, it's not like I go around all the time talking about nipples
No, well, that's right.
or my bottom or, so saying these words and I mean, this was written a long time ago. So I would have been a bit more self-conscious back then when I was first out there reading it. Yeah.
I know there's some poems that are easier to make public than others. I think that's where I was coming from with that question. It's probably not fair to the poem to home in on one line from it to discuss, but the line, "I spent my adolescence in disguise," struck a chord with me because it could describe so many people with either body image or identity issues. Can you say something about why you felt the need to be in disguise and whether assuming that disguise did protect you in some ways or whether it was ultimately unhealthy?
Well, there are a few levels to that. So that line, "Do you think I look busty?" I would say that a lot, except it was a longer line. I would say to my brother or my mother or whoever, I'd say, "Do you think I look busty in this?" So it would be, whatever dress or top I was wearing. And I really didn't want to look busty, obviously. So there's that literal level there about wanting to disguise the feeling that you're big-breasted or, that your breasts are a bit large. So there's that sort of literal level. But going beyond that, and what's mentioned in the poem is, in disguise, adolescence in disguise, in the particularities of my background. I had parents who were obsessed with Hollywood movies, and I took on those obsessions. And so I grew up very obsessed with beauty or a very Hollywood defined notion of beauty and of womanhood or gender that comes from the 50s and 60s and so forth, So when I was an adolescent, I was very ladylike, you could say. I didn't swear, I didn't smoke, I didn't drink. I still don't do those things, but the swearing, yes, but not the drinking and not the smoking. But, so the disguise thing is taking on a lot of notions about identity or of self in terms of how you're influenced by family.
I mean, there's two layers in my thinking too, that we generally, we want to be seen for who we are and not for how we appear. And how the appearance can actually distract people from who we are, or make them focus their attention where you don't want it to be focused. But sometimes we don't even want to be seen at all. And I'm just wondering, which of those it was for you.
It was both in a way, because I was shy and quiet and unconfident. So, but I had this other side where I wanted to be Julie Andrews or Barbara Streisand, or, I wanted to be a singer and an actress, all of those things. So that's the part that, wanted to be seen. And I was actually very academic, very a good student, but disguise comes into that too, because I really like to stay in the background. And I still feel like that. I'd love to be Elena Ferrante, except I love performing my work. I do enjoy reading, and I love singing, and, so I have that side of myself, but I also, it'd be nice to be anonymous sometimes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, well, it's a bit hard if you're a performance poet, but I'm just wondering where the narrative I can take you there, because if you adopt different personas, then you are, even through your poetry, you can be in disguise.
Sure. Yeah.
Looking back on it now, what would you say to your younger self?
Oh gosh, I think there are so many things that I would say to my younger self, but in relation to the whole body image stuff, that girl was fine. She didn't have big breasts. She was just, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what I would say. It was really funny actually, because I came late to teaching in terms of getting a dip ed, and my first year out teaching was at Mentone Girls Secondary College, and I had these 2 Year 10 English classes, and in my first class I took along 2 of my poems. And one of them was this one. I read to these girls who were, 15, 16. And I took it along because I thought it was funny, and I was sort of completely, and they took it so seriously, and I was a bit taken aback. And then I realized later, of course they take it seriously.
They're the age.
They're in the midst of this,
Yeah.
Let alone that you have to explain who Audrey Hepburn and Judy Garland are and all of that. No, not necessarily. I did show photos of them and all of that.
I love the arts, when you've got them, flaunt them, because I've witnessed, I've witnessed the exact opposite. And that is sort of elder women in the family saying, don't flaunt them, to one of my daughters. So it's kind of like come around full circle there. But isn't it interesting, that the narrator wants to be Audrey Hepburn. It wouldn't have been too bad to be Sophia Loren, though, would it?
Oh no, I'd still go for Audrey Hepburn any day. I mean, I think Sophia Loren is wonderful, but no.
I'm thinking about how such issues that you deal with in this poem are amplified these days with the onset of social media and TikTok and YouTube and influencers, that has made it even harder for young women in particular to be comfortable with who they are and how they appear. There is irony in this poem, isn't there? Because I can imagine some girls, women, would just love to be compared to Sophia Loren now.
Oh, look, I think it's one of the most disturbing and important and huge issues of our time. I remember some time back reading an article in The Good Weekend about 10-year-olds, and might have even been Madonna King. I can't remember who the journalist was, but she'd done all this research and interviews with young girls, and oh my God, it was one of the most depressing, terrible things I've ever read about
So hard. So
young,
hard to be a young girl now.
yeah, their obsession with their bodies and their faces, and
Well, they're not even real bodies they're obsessing about. They've
yeah.
been doctored images of bodies
Mm,
for the most part. Yeah.
mm.
Yeah, no, it opens up a huge subject. That's I think even more relevant now than it was probably in the time that you were writing about.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I think we've regressed so much.
Mm. Okay. Would you like to read another one?
This poem is called Writing Companion, and it's dedicated to Alicia sometimes. Companion, from the Latin sharer of bread. She asked if we should swap words, but I'd already grown attached. How quick the hand holds on to gunmetal and red. How soon the heart says pretty and opens, then clasps. The taste of sounds on the tongue, the sharp tang of consonants, how the vowels curl. I hand them over, reluctant, then the moments of suspension, hovering in empty space, and finally the return, where all the words rush and anything is possible.
So, writing companion. Would you say, Gayelene, that this poem is love and art and work all in one?
Yes, I would.
It's got it all, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and I'm interested in that sort of sequence that you describe. There's the writing, and then there's the attachment, and the reluctant letting go, and the sharing, and the anticipation, and then what comes back, which is a great opening where anything is possible. Can you say something about the process of sharing your work and the possibilities that opens up for you?
There are so many different levels to sharing your work. So there's sharing your work in workshopping contexts. There's sharing your work with friends. I write with friends, as in this poem. I have many writing companions where we write together explicitly for that purpose. So there's sharing in those contexts. There's sharing your work publicly when you read, and there's sharing your work when your work gets published and in a book or a journal or an anthology, and it goes out into the world. So, and I think all of those are they're all connected, and they're quite distinctive as well in terms of the kinds of sharing that they are. But specifically when it comes to sharing my work, what was the second part of that question? Sharing your work and
Can you say something about the process of sharing your work and the possibilities that opens up?
oh, okay. I think that sharing your work is an act of generosity too, you know. It's
Because some people never do it.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a generous thing because there's so much vulnerability in sharing your work, and especially if you, well, even if you are a poet who isn't a very autobiographical poet, which I think ups the ante on the vulnerability. But also, even if you write about nature or you write about, you know, any content, you're still putting yourself on the line in a way that many people would be afraid to do, or many people simply don't do. So I think the possibilities that it opens up is about connecting with others and that shared humanity, the people who come up to you after you read or who have read your work and give you this feedback and you know, the people who say to me or who say to you things like, oh, I felt you were telling my story, or I relate so much to this or that. And when you're in your own little world writing, you can think that it's so personal to you and so individual sort of thing. But of course it isn't.
Have you gone a step further and collaborated?
Oh, I love collaborating. Yeah. Well, I collaborated a lot in my playwriting life. It's fabulous. So I wrote over
And film?
and film, yeah, more recently with film and the past. Yeah, I love collaboration.
And not so much poetry?
Not so much poetry in terms of writing poetry. I've only done that a few times. Yeah.
You have to find a like-minded, kind of like-minded soul, don't you?
Yeah.
Poetic kindred spirit.
Yeah. Have you?
I've done it once. I've
Uh-huh.
done it once. Uh, but it was years ago. It was an opportunity. I read someone's book and I was so moved by it that I took some of the work and I responded to it. And then he responded to that. And then we decided that we would collaborate to make a joint poem out of it, which we did, which was a lot of fun. And it was unlike either of ours. So there's a different voice again. That's the only time I've done it. I wouldn't mind doing it some more if I could get my act together, but that's a story for another day. It's possessive, isn't it? When you are attached to your words and reluctant to hand them over.
uh that's funny, that line, because every time I read it I feel, oh, I'm not like that at all. And it's very specific because it's about this it has a very specific reference, and that is that sometimes one of the exercises I do with writing companions is where we'll read a poem and then we'll discuss it and we'll choose 5 words from that poem and gift them to each other, and the other person needs to include those words in a piece of writing. A poem, it might not. And sometimes when you do this, whether it's in a pair or 3 people or whatever, sometimes people will say things like, oh, they're terrible words that you've given me. They're just words, you know. But and sometimes, yeah, you're giving the other person words that you love, sort of thing. Yeah.
So it's not possessive. Yeah, you're actually happy to swap words when it comes to it. But in this poem, you didn't want to because you'd already grown attached. And I was wondering whether that was because of your labor over the words, the sweat in them, that you've given birth to them and consider them yours, or is something else at play?
No, that was very specific about that particular exercise, which is just there isn't a lot of sweat there at all. It's just choosing 5 words from a poem that read, someone else's poem, and so, but it's just that thing of you grow attached to words.
There is a school of thought that in the perfect poem, you can't replace any word in it with another word. And I was just wondering, the words gunmetal and red, which you've put in italics here, how quick the hand holds onto gunmetal and red. Why those words?
I have no idea. I don't remember.
I was going to say, could you equally have put other words in there? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's an explicit reference to the original poem where we
mm,
shared words, or maybe it's more likely actually something else I'd been reading the morning that I wrote the
mm,
poem, you know.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Cool. Got another one? I know you've got another one. I shouldn't ask you if you've got another one. You have another one.
I have another one. This is called The Day You Left. Oh, dreams again. My God. The day you left. There were dreams last night, and you were not in them. I watched your ship as it moved so slowly and stood on the shore as if I was safe. The moon became only a mention, a speck. The ocean was dark and so still. There was nothing there, just this blank silence. The night was not warm. I pulled my coat tighter, thought about going home, the key in the lock, putting the heater on, saw the house in my head as it waited for me. Our singing group would be half over by the time I got there, if I went. And then the absence of the ship. I stared at the space where the ship had been, and I thought, now I understand. Negative capability finally made sense to me. But it felt too late. Your poetry went with you, and I don't mean your books. I arrived just after tea break, just before tea break. I remember them surrounding me like a circle as I stumbled in, telling them, he's gone. I really believed that night singing would save me. But what I remember is all the faces turning to see me when I stood at the door, hesitating. The deep breath I took before I launched into the outstretched arms, the bright, warm hum of the room.
So it occurred to me, Gayelene, when I read this poem, that every poet has a poem like this rattling around in their heads because people are always leaving, you know. So I did something. I Googled the title, and
Uh-huh.
guess what? I found half a dozen poems
Yeah.
with the same title.
Uh-huh.
But what was really interesting was that most of those other poems are mired in sentimentality and are by narrators who seem to be stuck and unable to move on.
Uh-huh.
Were you conscious of the trap of sentimentality when you wrote this poem? And what did you do to avoid it?
Um, well, I wasn't conscious while I was writing it and composing it. Um, and I don't think I think I thought it is what it is, you know. I didn't
Mm,
I didn't worry too much about sentiment.
mm,
However, I do remember entering it into the ACU Poetry Prize, and they always have a theme,
mm,
and so I don't remember what the theme was for the year that I entered this poem, but I do remember saying to another poet, "Oh, I don't think it's intellectual enough. It's too sort of too I don't know what word I used for it, but um emotional or yeah. Hmm.
mm. Well, I mean, I think it actually got layers of meaning in it. Um, there's a psychological component to many of your poems. You've talked about your interest in, you know, psychology, um, And I thought this poem could be read both literally, where the ocean is in fact the ocean, and figuratively, where the ocean is a symbol or metaphor or representation of the subconscious mind expressing itself in dreams. And, you know, did you intend both readings of the poem when you wrote it, or do you have a particular reading in mind?
Excuse me. It's based on personal experience. So there is that literal level of someone going across the ocean and so it does come directly out of that. But obviously, you know, I think the things you choose to focus on and the way you arrange the words and images, etc., is there's a deliberation in that. Even if it's unconscious, it's a deliberation.
Yeah, you express yourself in a particular way, and there's an intuitive, if not conscious, reason for that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I saw the poem. This is what I love about the ambiguity of poetry. Everyone's going to read it a different way, as not just about a person leaving, but about love leaving, and the ship a metaphor for love. That's one reading.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with the term negative capability. I had to look it up. Can you explain what you mean when you say negative capability finally made sense to me?
So I always forget what that means myself. It comes from Keats, I think. I think he first used it in this very famous essay. And if you look at a definition, I had a feeling you might ask me about this, so I looked it up again, and it said that it's the capacity of artists to pursue ideals of beauty and perfection and sublimity, even when it leads them into intellectual confusion, etc. But there's also the other meaning of a writer's ability to accept uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts. And this comes from Keats, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Oh, actually, he first used the term in a letter in 1817. I thought it came from an essay, but anyway. Yeah. So, the meaning for me there in the poem is about loss and absence and yeah, that do you know what I mean by that?
Oh, I think if you could elaborate a bit further, loss and absence, how? You finally understood that?
I don't know that I can really articulate it. What did you get out of when you looked up negative capability?
I can't remember now.
Oh.
I managed to forget it. Well, if you think of capability, then negative capability is almost some kind of incapability. It's almost like something that you're not capable of. As if you almost become unable to, you understand that you're unable to understand loss and, but
I think for me, I think my understanding of it was based on how someone else described it to me, which was being able to live in, it's about the state of living in uncertainty. So sitting with uncertainty, and so
not fighting it, just
yeah, and also that person going at that time on the literal level, that even so the future the future was unknown for both the persona of the poem, but also that person leaving. The whole thing becomes a sort of uncertainty.
As the future is always unknown.
The future is always unknown, but when you have particular circumstances, it's really in your face that there are so many unknowns now.
I'm interested towards the end of the poem in the idea that singing might save you. Singing would never save me, let me say, but in the end, it's other people and their compassion and empathy and outstretched arms that do it, isn't it? Together with, you know, our own resilience, of course.
Yes, yeah, that is absolutely the meaning of it for me. It's the connection, the community, you know, the capacity for connection, and how that embraces you and changes.
Yeah, and it gets you through the moment. It gets you past the moment. There's something redemptive about it.
Yeah, yeah. But also singing can help a lot.
Yeah, sure. If you know how to sing, everyone tells me to shut up when I try.
Music I find is I listen to music nearly every day, you know. I sing a lot, and it's very cathartic.
Now you have one more poem for us.
Yes, and it is the last poem in my book. It's called The Memory of Colour. The Memory of Colour, after the painting Angofra, Salamander Bay, 2001 by David Rose. And this is in memory of Judith Rodriguez. I have decided to remain vertical. Though there are footprints all over my eyelids, my body, I haul myself out of bed and into bathers, knowing how a day begins can keep you upright just a little bit longer. These morning routines, like cats, wait on the windowsill. I am no longer a woman who wears a hat and rides her bike around Carnegie, but now and then I return to my bike like a long-lost friend. I slip out of my sandals and leave them on concrete while I walk in bare feet all the way to the place where I lock the bike. The walk back is about 20 steps, and sometimes that is all it takes to remember green, to feel it in your feet, to feel practically feline. I hover on the first step, then wade right in. I hold the colour of the sky in my arms and swim.
So once again, there's a painting, so this ekphrastic poem. Did you want to say something about the painting by David Rose and how it connects with this poem, and about why this poem is in memory of Judith Rodriguez?
David Rose's trees, he has a number of paintings of trees, and they are some of the most stunning, most beautiful paintings I know of. The colour of the sky, that blue, he really captures that stunning blue sky. And then there's the colours of the bark and of the tree, the yellows and the contrasts and the shapes. They're just stunning work. So I love that work, and I feel that its connectedness with the poem is I think the poem is reaching towards that feeling that's in the painting, that the painting encapsulates, which is a soaring kind of feeling. It's about resilience, it's about being upright, it's about all of those things. And it's obviously very Australian too, and that's important about the image. So those are some of the connections there. And in terms of Judith Rodriguez, my other poem that I read that was dedicated to Anya, both Anya and Judith were huge mentors, teachers, colleagues of mine, and huge influences on my own work, and friends, good friends.
The opening line, "I've decided to remain vertical," which is the title of the book. It's an arresting line, and I was reading the book trying to work out what the title had to do with the book until I got to the last page and the last poem. How did that line? I mean, again, you know, I'm quizzing your memory here, but how did that line come to you? And did the poem spin off the line?
Yes, to the second part of your question. And I'm going to that because, of course, I don't remember. But I think it's very much, again, related to the whole housing thing. I think that the poem came out of or was related to one of those times, or it feels like it's just an ongoing thing, but you know, to do with housing stress. And because I have reacted very, very badly to housing stress over time, and you know, have been very distressed and very depressed and many things like that. So the poem I vaguely remember is related to that, and therefore that line comes out of, you know, must have been a moment when I was coming out of that, or trying to come out of that, and having that attitude of, okay, I'm going to stay vertical. I'm not going to, you know, hide under the covers and want to stay in bed all day or something, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to refuse to lie down in the face of this.
Yeah. But I must say that I will share with you though that it took a while for me to settle and be happy with a title for my collection. It was originally going to be called Red Horse by the River. And there were a few other possibilities. And I had a few wonderful poet friends read the collection, and someone like Emily Collier, I think she came up with about 50 fabulous titles. They were amazing. But ultimately, before that, no, it must have been after that, Kathleen Fallon, the great writer Kathleen Fallon, she read my manuscript and she came up with about 12 titles or so. And she mentioned that she really liked this one. And I was very unsure about it for lots of reasons. And obviously, eventually, I went with this one. And I'm really glad that I did.
I'm glad you did too. It's fabulous. I think it's a fabulous title. The footprints all over your eyelids and body is, to quote Emily Dickinson, a slant way of saying you've been walked all over. And what comes across for me is not anger or bitterness, which might be there, but what comes across is resilience and a kind of hard-won defiance. You know, I'm not going to lie down. No matter how many times you walk over me, I'm going to get up. Have I read that right?
Yes.
Cool. I love it when I read it right.
Or I'd like to think so anyway. Yeah.
Is this poem a celebration of the simple things? You know, the beauty and joy of routines, of bike rides, and the memory of green beneath your feet, and reminding us, you know, that perhaps we sometimes need to be reminded that those things are always there for us if we pay them any attention.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Very much about routines and nature, being in nature, being connected with your body, getting into the body, you know, going for a swim or a bike ride or a walk or whatever. These things are small, but they're incredibly restorative.
And we can forget about them.
Oh yeah. And also not feel like doing them or not want to do them when we're going through difficult times, you know.
The ending of the poem, which is also the ending of the book, is, well, you mentioned the word soaring, which I think is a lovely word. I assume that you wanted to finish the book on this note, that you wanted to finish that way, that at every given moment we are hovering on the first step with the opportunity to wade right in, you know, that the sky is always there for us to hold, the color of it in our arms. Was this a note to self as well as a note to your readers?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. In fact, you're making me think I should memorize this line and, you know, summon it when I need it.
I've got a few notes to self. I think they're not bad things to have a few notes to self every now and then, just to keep yourself grounded.
Yeah.
Poetry has many functions, as we all know, among them to explore, investigate, lament, observe, engage. Is one of those functions for you, as I glean from this poem, for poetry to soar?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Like a song, you know, like song, like music. It's to remind you of beauty and or to be moved, to be transformed, even if it's just in that moment, you know, of encounter.
Isn't that a great way to end the podcast?
It's terrific.
Thanks so much, Gayelene, for sharing your poems and exploring your experiences, thoughts, and insights on the theme of love, work, art, and everything. Details of Gaylene's two wonderful books and where to get them will be posted with this podcast, so please look out for them. Coming up on Poets Corner next is Robbie Coburn, reading poems and talking on the theme of healing through poetry. And after that, Mark Tredinnick, reading poems and talking on the theme of the 6 gifts. We'll see you then. Thank you.